I want to start with a statement recently collected, a kind of a testimony collected by Doctors Without Borders in a Serbian forest from a Syrian man stranded with wife and a 6-year-old son. After going through all this, I feel like I'm dying 60 times every day. I wonder, what will my son say to me when he grows older? Why did you take me with all these dangers around? To make me face death 1,000,000 times in 1 hour? Did you want to sacrifice me for your own sake? Of course I didn't. I had either to let him be slaughtered or take him in a death trip. So what I want to do with you over this half an hour is rather, I guess, ambitious. I want to give you offer some glimpses into that very resilient death trip, and where and how, and the spatial and time constraints. I also want to point out the centrality of Turkey right now, especially as Europe or the rest of Europe tries to grapple with the so-called crisis. And finally, I intend to share some reflections on our work as social scientists or in the humanities. So, well, probably we all know that the Syrians, even within Syria, need facilitators, smugglers, to move around within the country and to facilitate their transit or exit out of the country, including, to all the neighboring countries. Routes are kind of old, and it used to be smuggler routes for petrol and cigarettes, and now it's humans, persons. Every kind of soldier and every kind of military formation asks for money for at kind of every stage of the way. When not sex. There's sometimes groups traveling together by car, but they give you a ride. It's not free. It could be anywhere between $80 and $1,000 to just get you to the border with Turkey. Some Syrians, happens to be especially Palestinians, fly to Sudan and then all the way to Libya and then to Italy. But I want to, of course, focus on the Aegean, Turkey to Greece route. I also want to briefly point out that there is nothing, kind of a deterministic or nothing only geographical about this route. So, in other words, over the last few years, it became essentially impossible for Syrians to travel to Algeria, Libya, and Egypt. Algeria and Egypt because of visa requirements over the last couple of years. Libya because of the whole situation there. And also Syrians became really aware of the lethal, deadly nature of this so-called central Mediterranean passage between, again, Libya and Egypt and Italy. So this is the core of my research, the kind of maritime passage. And I do want to point out that 2015 was the so-called deadliest year on record. And I feel like I don't want to share the numbers. I have some issues with trivializing these numbers right now. But we use the exact same phrase, the deadliest year on record in 2014 and in 2011. And I've been kind of following this and being on top of this for the last decade or so. So I'm not too happy or too optimistic about this. So so there is a lot of discussion about Turkey, and it was in the news a week ago. People kind of stranded on the Syrian side, close to Aleppo, and The huge number, of course, of Syrians already in Turkey, which is again around to at least 2.5 million. In reality, the border between Syria and Turkey, or rather from the Turkish side, is not really open. It's never open. In early March 2015, or since March of last year, so it's been a year, the border on the Turkish side is open to aid trucks, to traders, to injured people, Syrians, to Syrians who are already registered in Turkey and are given a special permission to visit Syria. So it is really common knowledge among Syrians, especially since the latest kind of wave of terrorist events or attacks within Turkey, that Turkey can be entered only using smugglers. And even using smugglers, the kind of only route right now is the one close to Antakya because of the hilly terrain, which makes it difficult for the police forces in Turkey. There have been reports, Human Rights, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, kind of collecting testimonies of detention overnight on Turkish soil, hundreds of people forcibly returned to Syria, beatings by Turkish border guards, and also Turkey introduced a requirement right now in January that Syrians coming from third states such as Jordan and Lebanon must have a visa to enter the country. In the meantime, since last October and then November, and then it was kind of ratified right now, 3 billion euros have been committed by the European Union purportedly toward improving the situation of Syrian refugees registered in Turkish camps. But only 10% of the Syrians are actually living in those camps. And so the vast majority, 90% or so, live outside government-run refugee camps. And so, it's an open-ended question. Okay, those 3 billion, assuming, they reach Syrian refugees, which Syrian refugees and how many and all of that. Also, I do want to say that during 2015, the Turkish government improved access to education and healthcare for Syrian refugees. But since September, we are also we're seeing more detention of people trying to cross to the EU. And it's detention up to 2 months, ostensibly arbitrary. And it's, detention 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles to the east of, the kind of more European part of Turkey or Anatolia. Recorded. So allegedly, there has been torture, and there's the testimony while in detention, while in arbitrary detention, by testimony by a 40-year-old Syrian at one of the removal centers. And quite interestingly, upon being released from this detention center, this guy brought with him a label he found on some equipment of the facility, mattresses or a bed or something. And the label says, EU, European Union contribution, 85%. So, Europe paid for that detention center, and it dates back to 2013. So there are additional reception, which is detention centers being planned and built, and this has been going on for many, many years. In one facility, personnel said, this is humanitarian detention. It's like, these are beggars, these are people who really wouldn't have any other place, where to sleep. So we're not detaining them. It's, humanitarian. I've seen, I've seen this kind of argument and discourse over the last 10 years, and it's kind of becoming dominant. And a lot of people are, signing their voluntary returns to Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan, and we can talk about the voluntary nature there. Just briefly, there is an important number of Syrian refugees who work illegally in Turkey, and obviously making them vulnerable to abuse. Very recently, the Turkish government kind of passed new legislation allowing Syrian refugees to work but it's only a tiny minority, and there are a lot of minor qualifications. So what I'm saying is that the vast majority of Syrians find themselves working informally and being exploited. Also, very briefly, one needs to keep in mind the larger issue to which Jonathan kind of hinted of child and informal labor in Turkey. A report from 2012 estimated there were 1.5 million informal workers in the garment and leather industries, compared to just 500,000 registered workers. So, it's a huge workforce, and much of it is informal. And there are about almost 500,000, 400,000 Syrian children who are not in school in Turkey. In some cases, they've been out of school since the beginning of the war. Many are working informally, learning Turkish, and, as you said, supporting their families. Now, the kind of bulk of what I want to say about this, between January and October 2015, the Turkish Coast Guard intercepted some 60,000 people in the Aegean, actively preventing them from reaching Greek islands. Still, many people want Turkey to do more, including Frontex, which is the EU border patrol agency, a variety of European officials and think tanks, and even the liberal newspaper, German, Der Spiegel. And as I explain in my book, there's a fundamental empirical fault in the abstract expectation that Turkish or Greek, Egyptian, Libyan, Tunisian, Italian maritime patrols can somehow safely, humanely, and without the use of force deter, dissuade, or reroute Europe-bound migrant boats. Or boats. Let's forget about the ethical aspect. There is a military logistical difficulty. I mean, you can sink boats, I document that. You can damage boats, you can use force. So, you can do that, but there is that kind of price. And yet, we hear paradigmatically that, quoting, it is a myth that the Greek-Turkish border can't be protected, as the Greek Navy has sufficient capacity to keep refugees out. And this was, again, just an example, not picking on this person, but it's the Interior Minister of Austria. And as I said, even Der Spiegel and even a lot of so-called liberal newspapers and magazines are essentially, pointing their finger at Turkey for not doing enough at sea, not only closing the borders on land. And I should mention also that, this idea, again, quoting somebody else, Frontex, that Turkey has to make it more difficult for the migrant smugglers, has been taken up lately by NATO, North Atlantic Treaty, whatever organization, military. So we see this, what they call a military humanitarian kind of nexus emerging once again. Essentially Navy military patrols, monitoring the Aegean supposedly or ostensibly to identify smugglers, do intelligence work, but also, again, there's the humanitarian component of, rescuing people and all of that, which, again, I document in my book. I do want also to mention that, in 2015, Turkish police arrested more than 300 smugglers, which was, much more than they did in the past. And pretty obviously, fundamental point, Turkey patrols heavily its land borders with Greece and Bulgaria. And so, once again, why Turkey has a European, kind of territory, again, close to, neighboring Bulgaria and Greece. So why people don't just travel there and instead, go through the sea? Well, again, it's not just geography, it's politics and it's border enforcement. And by the way, it's also obvious that there are a lot of geopolitics in what Turkey and the Turkish government do and when they do things and what they say and when they say things. And Erdogan recently stated, well, actually, cyclically, we are not idiots. And we're not idiots. If we want, we can just put people on buses, or would you rather have us, kill them, kill these Syrian refugees? That's the kind of language he's using based on some transcriptions of his both political meetings at the EU level and kind of public speaking within Turkey, I guess. So, well, leaving behind all of this, evidently at a great human and financial cost, between January and December of last year, as you know, an estimated 1 million people arrived in Europe. 84% came from so-called refugee-producing countries, roughly half from Syria, then Afghanistan, Iraq. 1/4 of these 1 million were minors. This year, only 2016, some 60,000 people have crossed into Greece. Again, about half of them Syrians, about 1/4 again children. And this year there have been some 400 people dying or missing at sea, mostly in the Aegean, but also again between Libya and Italy. And all these people, especially the ones dying, but also the ones kind of suffering throughout, or, well, I don't like suffering, the ones being the object of structural violence. And, I don't have time to make this argument, but again, in my larger work, I do argue that this is violence. So, you could argue that they left behind the prospect of war or the evidence or the, experience of war to face what I call empirical offenses of structural injustice, crimes of peace, which is also the title of my work. So, this is empirical, this can be documented. There is cause and effect, there is correlation, there is a history. There are, concatenations that I think, again, we can prove and as social scientists talk about. So, now, in a forthcoming article, by the way, I do ask, well, the sea does nothing by itself, right? The sea, the Mediterranean, which probably, we all love, the sea does not enforce borders. The sea does not deport people. The sea does not sign bilateral agreements. The sea does not rescue people. The sea does not traffic in people. So again, there's something more going on, I believe, and again, which I call crimes of peace. And as I was saying in a forthcoming article, I do ask, what kind of mourning do crimes of peace engender, if any? So can there be public mourning when, I'm quoting, the great achievement of liberal capitalism, which is the separation of crime from the state, and that's Cohen on structural violence, kind of state violence. So, the great achievement, ostensibly, of liberal democracy, of liberal capitalism, the separation of crime from the state, is challenged by responsibilities that are located not at sea or with smugglers' unscrupulousness, but what I believe at the heart of liberal democracy. For it is obvious that in addition to specific situations they leave behind in countries of origin, including Syria as a whole, many people have become in need of protection because of the exploitation, trauma, and violence during their journey, including on Greek islands, Kos. I'm gonna skip a little bit, but what's going on at every single border in southeastern Europe, well, first of all, the Turkish borders, but then Macedonia and Greece, Macedonia and Serbia, Serbia and Croatia, Hungary, most famously or infamously. It's a succession of fancies. And this is Plan B. This is Europe's Plan B. I'll get to Plan A as well. Plan B right now being discussed is fencing the border between Macedonia, which is not even part of the European Union, Macedonia and Greece. So essentially leaving refugees kind of to their own devices or, at the mercy of the Greek and Turkish governments indefinitely, and that's it, sealing the border between Macedonia and Greece. At the border between Macedonia and Greece, we saw recently, in past November, people sewing their lips shut, non-Syrians, because this is relevant and related so much to Syrians in that everyone, says he or she is Syrian or has real or forged documents. And obviously, when you are, in Germany and the government is processing 1 million asylum requests or that kind of thing, whatever you're coming from about this, but, it's more work. So anyway, a lot of people who are not Syrian feel that they have to say that they're Syrian or, otherwise they're going to be stranded. So Plan A, which does not really exclude Plan B, Plan A is for Turkey being or becoming a safe country. Everyone arriving in Greece from Turkey being essentially deported back in Turkey, since it's a safe country. And a so-called coalition of the willing, led by Germany and the Netherlands, so a coalition of the willing, proactively resettling, ideally, 250,000 people on a yearly basis every year from Turkey. So in exchange for that resettlement, Turkey will, again, keep everyone in, miraculously fence all the borders, and Greece also, fence the Aegean, and that kind of thing. And I'm happy to address, okay, in theory, what would happen if, this Plan A came to be. But, Turkish Prime Minister Davutoglu has been reported stating, my country is not a concentration camp and will not host refugees indefinitely. We're not a concentration camp. Same things were said, over the last few years in Greece, in Italy, in Serbia. We're not a concentration camp. And so the question that I want to kind of posit is, to a degree, I've studied the how. How is the inequality in the kind of distribution or better responsibility for refugees is reinforced? How physically, materially, politically, you enforce this system of 2.5 million in Turkey, more than 1 million in tiny Lebanon, and 1 million in Europe, and we can talk about the US too. That's not just natural, it's actively enforced. So, how? But also why? What are the explanations or what are the justifications for perpetuating this inequality in the global responsibility for refugees, right? Why does it have to be this way? And, right-wing political actors, there's a long list in Europe, but right-wing political actors have, their own explanations. It's about welfare, it's about Islam, like we are Islamophobic, it's about, unemployment, it's about security, it's about our ostensibly Christian nature in Europe or, the US. So, okay, that's the right wing. How about, the more liberal, progressive, kind of centrist political leaders? What kind of explanations do they give for this, imbalance, inequality in the global responsibility for refugees? Silence. There is silence. There are no explanations. And, one hypothesis is that Eurocentrism, doesn't even need explanations. We just take it for granted. We, as a European, we just take it for granted that this is the way it works. This is natural. This is normal. Lebanon, I've heard, they're culturally similar. Sure. There's so much simplistic take on, again, as we were saying this morning, what the Middle East means, what culture, what religion mean. So I will not, kind of list possible kind of solutions or ways to mitigate the loss of life at sea, which is my priority, and we can do that later. But there are things that can be done, but are not happening. But I do want to spend, a couple of minutes or 5 minutes on kind of our role. It sounds presumptuous again, and it is, as social scientists or anthropologists or people in the humanities, and well, we do come across with we kind of stay honest and close to our existence and to that of our research participants, critically, but also honestly. And such consciously relational perspective challenges the ostensible straitjackets of representativeness and of biased, native, and naive anthropology, all occasionally deployed to dismiss not ethnographic, to a degree personal knowledge per se, but its theoretical and political import. And I want to, make the case that it's really others who need to be more defensive, who need to adopt a more defensive posture, analytically and politically. Others, without scare quotes, actually, but also without, lingering too much over our tentative provisional kind of self-exemption. I'm thinking of those commentators who casually embrace the realist fetish of sovereign legality at all costs and equate unauthorized mobility with a sacrilegious rupture. I'm thinking of those who fail to expose their transcendent knowledge to grounded and drowned existences. Those who think that the difference between economic and forced migrants is naturally given, thus allowing the summary repatriation for certain nationalities, Nigeria, Morocco, Pakistan, Egypt, Tunisia, and kind of forcing a lot of other people of, declaring Syrian nationality. I'm thinking these others, those who waiving aggregate data and disembodied refugee quotas, use the strong language of statistics to pontificate about the need to transcend the solidarity of coastal residents in Libya, in Italy, in Greece, in Turkey, to transcend the voice of refugees and to transcend, refugees' embodiment of structural injustice. Those who, by providing simplistic accounts of global migrations, are in turn able to purport simplistic solutions. And, ideally, it's about time for the supporters of the global ideology or regime of refugee containment, which is what we are seeing, refugee containment, to explain and justify, if they can, substantial preemption of the right of asylum, costly detention, socially disruptive removal, skyrocketing spending on border militarization. It costs, $1 billion plus the $3 billion to Turkey, a year to just do some surveillance of European borders. Implausible low labor quotas, which is really important. That's at the border, and ultimately the impossibility for most, especially impoverished and vulnerable people, including Syrians, to legally reunite with families already in Europe or here, seek work, and find a responsible jurisdiction in a place other than the place where they were born. Now, all of these questions, that I'm positing and that I should, make people assume a defensive posture are a bit maybe naive, because I'm taking for granted that we are within liberal democracies, and that in a liberal democracy you need to kind of justify what you stand for and the death you're causing and all that. But lately I think if you think about Hungary or even right now Slovenia, they don't consider themselves liberal democracies. They want to go beyond liberal democracy, kind of from the right. And you can hear casual statements about refugees alongside casual statements about defending family values. And so it is for them kind of one and the same battle. Christianity, family, refugees, like keeping them out. I want to conclude. I do have 1 minute with just stating the obvious, which is that decision makers and influential observers routinely discount the words and aspirations expressed by refugees and irregular migrants. And their concerns, their voices, their demands are marginalized as largely irrelevant to the world of diplomacy, international relations, and budgetary constraints. But what are the normative, political implications of the voices and experiences of these 500,000 Syrians who have faced death 1 million times each? I'm Syrian. Why aren't we allowed on planes again? Why, not on ferries? Let us through or kill us now. Or, suing one's lips. It's also saying something. Why can't we stay in a hotel? Why are you putting us on shelter? I mean, we have money. I've also heard that. So, how would the word and policy and human rights look like if, decision makers, human rights activists, and social scientists or scholars were actually to come to their conclusions on the basis of these things that these voices and experiences of these persons who are seeking to trespass always new forms of structural injustice. And obviously we're not doing that. Thank you.